Last Sunday was Father's Day, and we were chuckling about the readings on that day. Father will be divided against son, and son will be divided against father. Well, as hard as that reading was, this week our reading makes one seem like a children's book. Today we have the delightful story of a father considering murdering his son in the name of God. Speaking of children's books, I got curious and I wondered what children's books do with this story. And there are tons of these children's books about Abraham and Isaac. And the first one I looked at had this cute little picture of Abraham, Isaac, and the ram caught in a bush, and they're all smiling. And I couldn't help but put those little thought clouds above each one of them. What are they really thinking? What's really going on here? And it was interesting because the pitch for that particular book said, it's a perfect bedtime story, which gently tells the story of faith. The main bubble I was thinking about at the time, there were lots of bubbles, but the bubble over the ram, like, not again. So today, I want to share the thought bubble over my head. It's not theology. It may be totally off base, inaccurate, definitely heretical. But take it for that. This is a hard story. It is one that has a gravitational pull, attracting not only theologians, but artists, philosophers, psychologists, through all the ages, presenting a multitude of interpretations. Just struggle. Soren Kierkegaard's greatest work, Fear and Trembling, presents 4 interpretations of this story. So there's just all this material. And one homiletic professor said, if you're going to preach on this passage, you should allow 90 minutes for the sermon. So, we have popcorn at intermission. Don't worry. This is not a doctoral dissertation. I'm going to offer this morning my thought bubble, which is simply a comment about how this story triggers me. Allow me to be triggered. You can tell me when my 50 minutes is up. And the question that captures how this story agitates me is, do we actually care about our children? Really? As a country, are we actually sacrificing our children's future? Gutting hope right out of their soul? All right, some amens here. So I feel free to not offer answers to this story, but share my gut reaction. Because my first response to this story, to use a friend's saying, is to call the men in the white suits and slowly back out of the room. Yes. I feel this way because the result has been what we see today. People thinking they are religious, freely engaging in cruelty. Let's publish a Bible. And let's also send thousands who came here fleeing persecution right back into that persecution. Perhaps they feel supported by an Abraham loose in the world with wielding a knife. Who cares about the next generation? This is, for me, more a story about religious narcissism. What is important is Abraham's definition of faith, Abraham's perception of what God requires, and the impact on his son and upon the subsequent history of his people, irrelevant. So I'm agitated, I'm angry, and determined in my response to this story. This story has nurtured the sacrificial language of our liturgy. language that speaks of our humanity with disgust, and one that portrays God as disgusting as well, choosing to sacrifice his Son on a cross to redeem us. It's here where I like to ask, would you invite this God to your birthday party? Be top on your list? Have that kind of person in the room? It's time to rid ourselves of this idea that God is a bloodthirsty, angry man who is so fragile, emphasis fragile, that he can only be appeased by blood. One that cannot help but think that this story has provided fertile ground for churches to turn a blind eye to sexual abuse, to justify crusades, to become the religion of the nation state. And concepts of God are ones that create fear. This is what you get. At least the story is clear about that. When the Lord finally steps in to stop this traumatic moment, he says, "Now I know that you fear God." Well, congratulations. You've embraced fear. Not trust, not belief, not humility, but an aspiration to be a great religious figure through fear. And even though this story attempts to resolve itself or redeem itself by God saying, no, not necessary. Here's a ram. What about the ram? I almost called this sermon, "What about the ram?" Why should any sacrifice be required at all? Anywhere, in any way, shape, or form? No. Not God's provision. God's provision would be for God to get a life. And by that, I mean for all Abrahamic religions, Jews, Christians, and Muslims to stop blaming God for their lack of life. Any God I'm willing to entertain would be someone I would want at my birthday party. Somewhere along the line, we have lost the call to leave this planet in good shape for our children. In fact, we continue to willingly sacrifice the next generation by how we live. We may not be wielding a knife, but the way we cut budgets are just as deadly. Scott Galloway, author of The Algebra of Wealth, argues that every fiscal policy over the last 20 years has been an elegant transfer of wealth from the young to the old. We have transferred $1.5 trillion from our children to the wealthiest generation in history. Tax policies around capital gains benefit those who own stocks and have mortgages, which are not our young people. The average 72-year-old is 70% wealthier than they were 40 years ago. The average person under the age 40 is 24% less wealthy. The child tax credit gets stripped out of the budget, nearly $40 billion. But the $120 billion annual cost of living increase for seniors flies right through. Education has gone up fourfold. Housing. Anyone hear what's happened to housing lately? Galloway says, our youth look everywhere and see wealth. It's thrown in their face through all forms of media hundreds of times a day. He says, our elected officials are a cross between the Golden Girls and the Walking Dead. Yet the average age of Americans is 35 years old. We need to find ways to intentionally welcome younger people into policymaking in a time where there is a 95% incumbency rate thanks to gerrymandering. Minimum wage is adjusted for productivity if adjusted for productivity, would be well over $23 an hour. But it's been purposely kept low under great resistance. But the establishment tends to think of the younger generation as entitled or lazy. The Galloway says what they're entitled to be is outraged. The gospel reading today, the one I really wanted to preach on, mentions welcome 6 times in 2 sentences. We say we want young people in church, but are we intentionally articulating a deep awareness of what it's like to be young and growing up in this time and in this place? Are we willing to be emotionally present to our youth? I profoundly celebrate our outreach to Franklin School, providing books, our work in the front of the immigration court, protecting families and children, our feeding of the homeless, our efforts on securing a youth bus pass. I would say that if you want young people in church, you need to demonstrate not only these kinds of commitments, but also need relationships with our youth that express true empathy, understanding, listening. Empathy is in contrast to those labels often placed on our youth as being entitled or lazy. Here is my commitment to St. John's. At the last men's dinner, we had over 30 men in our parish gather together to eat and to talk. Our focus last time was on an interview by Scott Gallagher, very provocative interview on The Late Show. The discussion was robust. So I decided to form a book group to continue the conversation, or at least that was my promise to those of you who were there for this dinner, to talk about the state of men now and young men, to talk about where we are. And the reason why that invitation is not out yet is because I've been talking to young men. I'm intentionally looking for a time that works for them so that we can have this kind of conversation. 4 out of 5 suicides are young men. Young men are 12 times more likely to end up in prison. The homeless crisis, for some, is a male crisis. It's severe. And yet, what are we doing about it? We must not let the vision of radical welcome that Jesus so profoundly puts, it's just a beautiful gospel. You know, just a cup of cold water to these little ones, and you're on your way. It doesn't have to be complicated. I think that gathering to talk with our young members, intentionally making spaces to share stories, can be that cup of water. It helps to know how thirsty they are. It helps to articulate with them what is going on. It helps to know how thirsty we are to intentionally work towards a world that makes all people feel less alone. May this coming year be one where we not only seek to serve our younger generation, but also seek out relationship with them. Let us not just come to grips with the binding of Isaac. It's time to unbind